All right, hello and welcome. We are live with another sales chat. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM. And today our guest is John Flannery, who is like me here in San Diego. He's just a little bit further down the coast than me. Welcome, John.
Good morning, John. Thanks for having me on the show. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And as usual, Martha is in Vienna and she's going to be running the Twitter chat. So if you haven't been on this before and you want to get involved, go on while you're watching, go on to Twitter as well, hashtag SalesChats, and join in the conversation. Martha looks after that. If something interesting comes up or a question, she'll interrupt the show to ask us. Otherwise, she'll interact with you on Twitter. So today, what we wanted to talk to John about, and John is from Flannery Sales Systems. He has been in sales consulting and management consulting for a couple of years now, John, right?
30 years, 31, John, coming
31
up.
years.
In this business for 13 years prior to this, vice president of sales, director of sales, frontline sales representative, so all functional roles in a sales organization.
Yeah. And what we were going to talk about today is the 4 concerns of a CEO, because basically in John's line of business, when he engages with the company, a lot of the time, you know, you will talk with the CEO and understand, you know, what their concerns are before you get into training their salespeople. So,
yes.
So let's dive straight into it. What are some of the top concerns a CEO has today in your experience?
When we're working with organizations, and I was looking at this, John and Martha, as I was prepping for this call, we've worked with 54 companies over the past 13 years. And half of the time, I'll get an engagement with the CEO. It's oftentimes depends on the size of the organization, the function, how much the CEO is actually involved in sales. So I was going through and I was taking a look at it. I know the one objective that almost all CEOs have, whether private, public, whatever their structure is to increase their shareholder value. I mean, that's really what they're there to do overall. And 4 areas that we've identified in speaking to these CEOs, the first concern that they have is that sales cannot keep up the pace with the corporate strategy. Sales is just too slow for one reason or another. Sometimes that's in sales control, sometimes it's not, but their concern is that they're too slow. Secondly, is that they're not consistently diagnosing business problems, goals, or opportunities of their customers. Do they know actually what problems they're helping to solve? The third, should we stop on that one or go to the other 2?
I was going to, we'll come back to the 2, but let's just start on those 2 for a moment, right? I think it's a good starting point, because I think people sometimes don't realize that I mean, they know, but they forget that CEOs have bosses too, right?
Yeah.
Even if you own your own small company, you sometimes have a business partner, maybe the bank, maybe the bank is your boss. But in most size companies, there's a board. If you're a public company, there's a board. So you are answering to somebody. And as you say, strategy tends to be an agreement between the CEO and the board. And therefore, but once that's agreed, it's the CEO who's carrying the can on that.
Yeah. Indeed. So, yeah, you're right.
So from that point of view alone, you know, the corporate strategy, the rate of adoption and speed, and let's face it, how often is corporate strategy growing revenue?
Hard to determine, and depends who you ask. I don't like either of those answers. Yeah. But I think the challenge is the strategy clearly communicated? You and I have had this dialogue before. Yeah. Strategy is not something that's launched at the kickoff meeting and then everybody understands it and away you go for the year. So I think making sure that it's clearly communicated is a key component and ties into the concerns of the CEO.
And then the second point that you raised about understanding the business needs of customers and really,
yes.
And this is something that I've talked a lot about with people in the past, is how we make a lot of assumptions, don't we? I mean, and in companies we go, yeah, we know our customer. And then you say, well, when was the last time you really dug into their buying process, their concerns today, their industry. And it turns out that people are assuming that their customer hasn't really changed that much, which isn't true normally.
No, no, their customer, if their customer hasn't changed, their customer might not be around for too long.
So what are some of the ways that you advise companies how to really get to understand their customer better?
Yes, well, they could ask them. That would be one way. There's, as we both know, there's a methodology out there that says you tell them or you challenge them on what it should be. I say if you're going to do that, proceed with caution. You better have your act together and your story straight, which is the fourth concern, is that CEOs don't know that their sales organization can accurately tell the story of what we help companies to do. Or we could come in with an idea from the marketplace, from the research that we've done, and offer a menu or a list of objectives that should be looked at. If it is publicly traded, if it is a formal organization that posts their results and their plans on the web somewhere where you can look, you should know when you're going in what it is that the focus is on. Whether that is truly executed, whether that is consistent with what customers and prospects are looking for, remains to be seen, John. So therein lies the gap.
Yeah, and I think it's true that a lot of organizations, and we've probably all been guilty of this, is that because you're chasing, new business, you tend to have the conversation with your current customers about, are you happy? Not so much, are you happy with us? Right? And then you're going, good, they're happy with us, probably renew with us, but not use them, as we're talking about now, to really have a conversation, even post-sale, about the buying process, about what their strategy is for the future, what their concerns are for the future, or check-ins. And I think that's obviously, from a CEO point of view, right, that's probably a big miss by the company.
It may be. It may be. And back to the root cause of where this stems from. Is the strategy clearly articulated throughout the organization?
Right.
And if you Google this, and I was doing more research for this conversation we're having, and from the experience I have in the field, how many times does the CEO or the senior leadership have to touch their own organization to make sure they understand what the strategy is? Because what falls out of those things are what you just mentioned, John. What does their buying process look like? What are the objectives that they have for their own organization? And if we don't know those things as sellers, we're going to struggle when we go in to meet with those customers. And then I also would say prospects, because that's going to be a very different buying process, whether I'm reselling to the same customer or starting into a new relationship.
So elaborating on that point about the amount of times that a CEO has to touch an organization in order to communicate that, how much do you think the onus is on, say, the sales organization, the sales leadership, to really engage with the CEO and set up the mechanisms by which that strategy can be really communicated down to the frontline salespeople?
Yeah, it's annual business review, ABR, quarterly business review, QBR, monthly meetings, team meetings, one-on-one meetings. It cascades through the organization. I worked with a company in the scientific product distribution business for 6 years. And the leader of that organization, every time he would come into a meeting, John, he would reiterate their 3 pillars around their strategy. Every time, whether that was 1 minute or a 5-minute conversation, he would reiterate that on a regular basis. Then he would ask his sales leadership team to tie that into the meetings that they were having. Even if it was a forecasting meeting, if it was an opportunity review, he asked them to tie in some aspect of that. So I think that helps with the multiple touch approach to make sure that everybody, not just sales, anybody in what we would call customer facing roles, marketing, customer support, product development, all of those individuals understand what it is. His was the rule of 7. 7 times you had to say it. Right. I have teenagers. I find that the rule is somewhere around 23 times you have to say something for the message to be understood.
And And I love that example because let's face it, right? I mean, you can have a company, can have a strategy, but there are so many different touch points to prospects and customers, right? So
Mhm.
it could be through marketing, it could be through customer support,
Yeah.
account management, salespeople. And if everybody is kind of making it up as they go along,
Hmm.
your the message you get about the company could be very different from if I talk to somebody in customer service and talk to a salesperson. And salespeople are the vanguard of your message anyway, right?
Yes.
And oftentimes, so if you're not doing this and reinforcing this with them, you're really kind of leaving it up to chance what you're communicating to the market.
Yeah, you're hoping that they get the right message.
Yeah.
One of the other concerns of CEOs around sales is that salespeople were calling too low in the
Mhm.
organization. And what message are they giving to all of the different key players or business influences, whatever you want to call it, buying influences
Mhm.
in the organization? How tight is the message? How clear is the positioning? And CEOs are concerned about that. And I will encourage them on a regular basis to get out in the field and speak to customers, but not just customers, as I had mentioned before, speak to prospects
Mhm.
to see if they understand, if they engaged you, what business problem you were going to help them to solve, what goal you were going to help them to achieve, whatever you want to call that, and how clearly your organization is prepared to do that.
So an interesting point that you just raised there about uh, so the interesting point there you raised about really getting the message out, but calling too low in an organization.
Mhm.
So when you work with companies, like how do you help salespeople go higher in organizations or engage with more than just their first point of contact? Because let's face it, sometimes it feels good to get a friendly voice on the phone or in a meeting or whatever, and you
Yes.
latch onto them like a limpet, right?
Yeah.
Instead of the realizing that after a little bit of diagnosis, yes, this is a sympathetic person, but this isn't where the power lies. I've got to get beyond that. So how do you work with people to really start to expand and identify the right roles in a buying process?
Yes. Well, we help them first by building a prospect profile. What should it look like? And
Mhm.
if there's any mystery around how to do that, they could simply ask their customers, your existing
Mhm.
customers. Unless you're a startup, then it's new ground that you have to, a green field you have to pursue. One thing I encourage people to do is to start high in the organization. Of course, the best way to do that is for a referral to get
Mhm.
to a higher level, to a business decision title. And why not use your CEO or your chief commercial officer or your chief financial officer to help you to do those things? I had somebody say, not everybody is in the sales department, but everybody is in sales. And
Mhm.
some in customer service or product development might not like that, but we all are responsible for the next touch point. So I encourage sales leaders, salespeople to engage at a higher level. We'll help them with the ability on the words to use to do that, but also rely on other people in your organization to help you to do that. It ties back into what I'm saying. If the CEO wants to see that their strategy is being executed on a regular basis consistently, I might not ask the salesperson first. I'm going to ask the customer or prospect, how well are we doing at meeting your objectives
Right.
with the approach we're taking? I think you know, John, we work on tactical execution
Mhm.
of the commercial strategy. It's very different from PowerPoint slides at the kickoff meeting.
Right.
It's one call, one conversation at a time that I'm going to rely on. And we help our customers' sales teams with those conversations. They are going to get delegated to the people that they sound like. If they sound like procurement and they go to speak to somebody at a VP or a C level, they're going to get sent back down to procurement.
Mhm. So, why is it that you should go in at a higher level? If you just want to explain to people, some people would say, "Oh, maybe if I just if I can get in the door here at this level, then I can work my way
Mm-hmm.
up." Why is it easier in reality? Maybe not as easy to get at the higher level, but why is it more effective if you do?
Well, it's not easier to get at the higher level.
Mhm.
And most of the time, call reluctance at a higher level comes from a seller who's not prepared on what to say,
Right.
quite frankly. So it's more difficult to get in at the higher level, But the reason that we want to get there is because it shortens the sales cycle. And I don't know of a salesperson or a sales leader in the world, we've worked in 16 countries, that say they want to make the sales cycle longer. They all want to shorten it up, right? So how do we do that? So we have to load their lips, help them with the words to say, to get into those conversations at a higher level. I'd like to tell you, John, I always get in at the decision-making level, but I don't.
Right.
You know, I absolutely don't. Being in the business, I don't. So at some point, I have to engage the level that I'm speaking to and ask for access to those key players. Sometimes you'll get it, sometimes you won't. You have a business decision to make at that time. Am I going to invest more time pursuing the opportunity? So a variety of different ways to get at the higher level. But when you get there, you have to be able to stay there. Can you stay in that conversation? And that's where we help sellers with the positioning, the understanding, how to get to the business objectives.
Yeah. And it's also true, right? I mean, if you come in at a higher level and even if you get pushed down, the chances are that if your CEO says, here, this guy contacted me, I want you, John, to, take it over from here. You're a little bit more motivated to engage with that salesperson than if that salesperson contacted you directly, because you're like, CEO wants me to take this over, I better look into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say to the person who asked me, if you asked me to speak to somebody in your organization, John, I'd say, I'd be happy to. I'll speak to them. Will you facilitate the introduction?
Yeah.
Because that opens the door, right? Then after I have that conversation, I'd like to come back to you and summarize what I heard. So that ties the loop.
Yeah. So going back to our 4 concerns, right? So we have the one around, the strategy. We have the one around the communication of the strategy. We have the one around going in too low in the organization. What other concerns are there?
I'd mentioned it briefly before, but can the seller tell the story? And there is reams of information out there. The past 5 or 6 years, we've seen storytelling as a discipline in sales. I don't think it's the discipline in sales. I think it's one skill that we have to be able to embrace. But Harvard Business Review will say, from a CEO survey they did, only 13% of sellers can accurately tell the story of how my selling organization can help you to meet your objectives. Well, I can only meet your objectives if I know what they are. We talked about earlier in this interview how to get those objectives on the table. But once they are identified, can you tell the story? And this seems so clear and simple that all sellers should be able to do it, and many can't. Many can't tell the story.
And why do you think that is? Because some people would say, well, salespeople got to be natural storytellers, right?
Yeah.
So why do they struggle with this?
Right. They struggle to tie a clear understanding of how your salesperson's organization's capabilities, and I don't say features and benefits because I stay away from that old school approach, how your capabilities, whether they're product services, tie into the challenges that the organization is having that help them to meet their objectives. It's very simple. And we put it in a document that some look at as a script, which it's not. It's really a guide for a conversation. But do they understand how people use their capabilities? Not the speeds and feeds, not the feature benefit incentive, not those things. How do they use them to establish value, which is different than just describing a laundry list of what your product or service does?
Yeah, so that requires then, as you said earlier, going a little bit deeper and really understanding, how your customer uses your product or service. Because let's face it, oftentimes how customers use your product and service ultimately is not often the way you think they were going to use it or whatever. And so you really have to dig a little bit deeper and understand how they really use it, right?
Yes, you do. And before I'm aligning the use of my product or service, I need to diagnose. And again, John, this is such basic, fundamental selling necessities that it often gets overlooked. I need to understand what's happening today in the absence of being able to use my product or service, because you've got them to look for some reason, or they were looking when they contacted you, from latent to active need development. Now let's make sure that we understand where the void is, where the challenges are today, before we say I can fix it. Because if I don't do that, the perceived value of your offering is not going to be high. So we got to diagnose before we prescribe. All those old sales cliches that have been used for 50 years, but we really got to make sure that that happens.
Yes, what's it? Prescription without diagnosis is malpractice, right?
What is it in sales? It's a lost opportunity, is what it is in sales.
It's a lost opportunity, exactly.
But or it's still on the forecast.
Exactly, for a long, long time. Okay, so what are some other concerns that a CEO may have in your experience?
I bundled them into those top four. If their objective is to meet or increase shareholder value, there's other objectives that the CEO has, is to hit top line revenue, hit margins, penetrate market share. So there could be sub concerns that they have, but really the main four that we've identified is, are they executing on the strategy quickly enough? Most CEOs will say no, they're lagging. Secondly is, are they diagnosing the real business issues? Third, can they tell the story? Four, are they calling high enough in the organization? There's subsets under any one of those four, John. Is there one that you'd like to talk about more? Or
well, no, what I would like to talk about, though, in the last while that we have here, is one of the skills that I think is lacking in a lot of managers, and this goes all the way from frontline managers up to the most senior VP, right? Is the ability to manage upwards, right?
Yeah.
Because let's say, I mean, part of your sales leadership's role should be to reassure and inform the CEO that all of these things are happening, right?
Yes. Yes. So how do they do that? And is the CEO doing the seagull routine where they fly in, they deliver the message, and they fly out, and I don't see them? I'm not saying that the CEO should have the functional roles of a first-line regional sales manager, but I am suggesting that at the beginning of the year, a strategy is laid out and there's clear understanding of the messaging, who we should be calling on, what the marketplace is, that there is a tie-in. So there should be some mechanism that ties that CEO in, and there should be, at least in a forecasting call, some leading indicators of success that come from the different levels, reporting up, whatever you want to call that, a regular management cadence. What are those leading indicators of success that say we are tying into the strategy? And I encourage organizations to make sure that they're in place before they launch. Because if we do it after launch or after the kickoff, they're going to change, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying that they won't change in increments, maybe quarterly reviews, but let's make sure if increasing market share is what the CEO wants to see happen, let's make sure that we have an understanding and opportunity or pipeline development of what those accounts are that we're taking market share from the competition, as an example.
Yeah, and I think what you outlined there is the critical piece. I think there has to be some mechanism by which leading indicators are fed back to the CEO, because then you have a much more I wouldn't say relaxed, because business is never relaxed, but maybe a less frenetic interchange or communication between CEO and senior and frontline management.
Yeah, we know that the lagging indicators are reported, and formally, if it's to Wall Street or to some other publicly traded company, it's revenue. How did we do? What do the margins look like? The expenses, numbers of different ratios. But where are we going? And tying that into strategy and their go-to-market commercial strategy, whatever you want to call it, we help companies with that tactical execution. And one of the things I help first-line managers, second-line VP, all the way up to do, I'll be doing this next week with a company out of Portland, is to take a look at the pipeline and identify what those indicators are. So when they sit down with the president of North America or the CEO, in this case, who's based in New Zealand, they can give them a snapshot of what that looks like. And if the CEO or VP of North America wants to dive deeper, they can go into their CRM system and identify what those indicators are.
Yeah, no, that's exact. I think that's a critical point to end on, is leading indicators, because as you say, lagging indicators, they're important, but they're a rear view mirror, a view of what's happened. You can't, you can learn from it, but you can't change it because it's in the
Correct.
past. Leading indicators you can learn from, and you can also course correct.
Yes, absolutely. And it's important. I said it before, I'll say it again. Let's make sure that those pieces are in place at the beginning of the year and that the mechanism is in place, because everybody's so busy today. We skip this meeting. We don't do that. Let's make sure that those report outs are clear, tied into the strategy, and how is sales making sure that the CEO is getting the information that he or she needs.
All right, that's great, John. So we're as we end up the session, what we always like to ask our guests is to share what's your power tip. How do you set yourself up for success every day? What does John Flannery do?
I had an opportunity to play basketball with Aaron Rodgers, who's the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, and he said once his success was in his confidence. And I was just listening to what he said, and he said his confidence comes from preparation. Mm-hmm. So I prepare. Some of the things I do differently today than I did 31 years ago when I started working at Pitney Bowes. Some of those things are quite different, but preparation, pre-call planning, everybody has their sales calls planned. Mm-hmm. Do they plan for pre-call planning and setting up and really making sure that I have the information that I need to go in and have a good conversation with my next prospect? So it's very fundamental. It's what I do on a regular basis. I do it methodically, always looking for new business opportunities, formally or informally, but they're just very basic fundamentals in preparation.
Yeah, and I think that's a great one, because I do think, as you said, you know, everybody's so busy today, and I think we're very good at convincing ourselves that we have no time, when if you did a proper analysis of how we spend our day, there's plenty of times in there. And I think sometimes preparation gets kicked to the side, because that's what I said, preparation is hard work, right?
It is. It is. It's the dirty work. You know, it's, for me, it's in the evening, the night before, Sunday evening, getting ready for the next week. Mm-hmm. After the family settles down and I can go and I can prep for tomorrow, I have the calendar set up, but am I really prepared for those conversations that I'm going to have, much like this one today, to make sure that we have good dialogue and that there's some semblance of value generated in each conversation I have with a prospect.
Perfect. All right, John, before we go, just let everybody know where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, you can find Flannery Sales Systems on the web at drive-revenue.com. That's our URL, drive-revenue.com. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. If you Google Flannery Sales Systems, my direct numbers, area code 858-518-7039. I'll answer that most of the time if I'm not on an airplane or in a meeting. And John and Martha, thank you so much for this opportunity today. Always a pleasure to work with you and the team at SalesPOP.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, John. And my name is also John Golden from SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM, salespop.net, where you will find John and a host of other people like John who are regular contributors, bringing value, insights for free to all of you salespeople or sales-related professionals out there. Yeah. All right. Again, goodbye. This time I can say goodbye from San Diego from both of us. And thank you, Martha, as always, in lovely Vienna, Austria. Bye.
Thanks, Martha. Hey. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Have a great day.